I remember the exact moment I realized Willow Creek wasn't going to be the peaceful sanctuary I'd hoped for. It wasn't when we first pulled into the neighborhood with our moving truck, or when I signed the closing papers on our modest two-story home. It wasn't even during those first few months as I established routines for Ethan and Zoe after the divorce. No, that moment came exactly 3 months after we'd settled in, when I stood in my front yard staring at the splintered remains of our mailbox. The delivery truck driver was apologetic, his clipboard clutched tightly as he surveyed the damage. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll file a report right away." I waved away his concern. "It's just a mailbox. These things happen." What I didn't know then was that in Willow Creek these things didn't just happen, or rather, they weren't supposed to happen. And when they did, there were protocols, expectations, and most importantly, Karen Whitman. I replaced the mailbox the following weekend. The hardware store didn't have the exact same model, so I chose one similar in size but with a slightly more modern design. I liked it better anyway. It had a little red flag that Ethan found fascinating. 3 days later, I found the first post on the neighborhood Facebook group. Attention, Willow Creek residents. A friendly reminder that all exterior modifications, including mailbox replacements, must adhere to community standards as outlined in Section 4.3 of our HOA guidelines. It's disappointing when new residents think they're above these standards that maintain our neighborhood's charm and property values. Though I wasn't mentioned by name, the timing left little doubt who she meant. Still, I scrolled past it. I had bigger concerns, like helping Zoe adjust to her new school and making sure Ethan didn't think the divorce was somehow his fault. What I didn't realize was that I had just made myself the perfect target for Karen Whitman. By the 3rd week, Karen had moved beyond vague social media posts. I was pulling weeds from my front garden when she appeared at the edge of my lawn, clipboard in hand and sunglasses perched on her perfect blonde bob. "Melissa, right? I don't think we've been formally introduced. I'm Karen Whitman, HOA Communications Director." She didn't offer her hand. "I wanted to discuss your mailbox situation in person." I straightened, brushing dirt from my jeans. "Is there a problem?" "Well, yes, your replacement doesn't match the approved design aesthetic for our community. I've brought the relevant documentation." She extended several printed pages. I didn't take them. The original was destroyed by a delivery truck. I replaced it with what was available. "That's understandable, but now you'll need to replace it again with an approved model." Her smile never reached her eyes. "We have standards here in Willow Creek." I thought about arguing, but decided it wasn't worth the energy. "I'll look into it." Karen nodded, seemingly satisfied, but as she turned to leave, she paused. "Oh, and you might want to address the children's scooters on your porch. Exterior storage of recreational equipment is prohibited under Section 5.2. As she walked away, I noticed curtains twitching in neighboring windows. I was being watched, evaluated. This wasn't just about a mailbox. I didn't replace the mailbox again. Between work, single parenting, and trying to rebuild our lives, spending hours finding an identical replacement for an already functional mailbox fell to the bottom of my priority list. Karen noticed. Everyone noticed. The next week, a new post appeared in the community group. Reminder that driveways should be pressure-washed seasonally. Some of our newer residents might benefit from borrowing equipment from neighbors if they don't own the proper maintenance tools. This was accompanied by a photo, not of my house specifically, but of a driveway with a few oil stains that looked suspiciously like mine. That evening, my neighbor Diane brought over a homemade lasagna. "I didn't know if you'd had dinner yet," she said, though it was only 5:30. I invited her in, grateful for adult conversation after days of 7-year-old Ethan's dinosaur facts and 9-year-old Zoe's detailed reports on playground politics. As the kids attacked the lasagna, Diane leaned closer. "I see you've met Karen." "Is it that obvious? You're her current project." Diane sipped her water. "Last fall it was the Robertsons and their unapproved shade of white trim. Before that, the Changs and their excessive holiday decorations. Why does everyone let her get away with it? Diane's expression was sympathetic but resigned. She's been on the HOA board since she moved here 3 years ago. Controls the Facebook group, too. People find it easier to comply than fight. What about her family? Her husband never says anything? Richard? He barely speaks to anyone, works long hours, keeps to himself. Their daughter Lily is hardly ever around. I think she stays with friends a lot. Diane glanced toward my kids, lowering her voice. Between us, I don't think anyone particularly likes Karen, but she knows exactly how far to push without crossing any clear lines. After Diane left, I sat on my porch swing watching darkness settle over Willow Creek. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Manicured lawns, tasteful exterior lighting, coordinated mailboxes. Everything in its place. Except me, apparently. Over the next few weeks, Karen's campaign intensified. A pointed comment about unsupervised children when Ethan and Zoe played in our fenced backyard. A note about lawn maintenance standards taped to my door after I worked a 60-hour week and missed my regular mowing day. I started to recognize the pattern of her surveillance. Morning walks with her phone ready to document infractions, afternoon drive-bys in her immaculate white SUV, evening posts crafted to sound helpful while highlighting perceived failures. Some neighbors offered quiet support. Mrs. Peterson from across the street brought cookies and whispered, "Don't let her get to you, dear." Mr. Jenkins, a retired accountant who served on the HOA board with Karen, gave me apologetic nods when we crossed paths at the mailboxes. Others kept their distance, as if my status as Karen's target might be contagious. I considered fighting back, reporting her harassment to the HOA board, confronting her directly, starting my own counterposts in the Facebook group. But every time I drafted a response, I thought about what Ethan's therapist had said about stability and consistency being essential after divorce. The kids had already weathered enough storms with the separation, the move, new schools. Did I really want to drag them into a neighborhood war? So I stayed quiet, kept my head down, focused on building our new life. "Mom, why does that lady take pictures of our house?" Zoe asked one afternoon as we unloaded groceries. I followed her gaze to see Karen across the street, phone raised in our direction. "Some people are very interested in rules," I said carefully. "Dad says some people are just jerks," Ethan piped up from inside the car, where he was struggling with a gallon of milk. "Hey, language," I corrected automatically, though I couldn't disagree with his assessment. That night, I lay awake thinking about my choices. I'd moved to Willow Creek because the school district was excellent, the neighborhood safe, the houses affordable for a newly single mom. I'd imagined making friends, building community, giving my kids the stability they deserved. Instead, I'd landed in Karen Whitman's crosshairs, becoming the subject of her need to control and criticize. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep turning the other cheek. As fall approached, the tension spread beyond just Karen and me. I noticed how conversations would stop when I approached groups of neighbors, how playdate invitations for my kids sometimes came with apologetic explanations about keeping things small. At the neighborhood block party, I overheard fragments of conversation. "Don't want to get involved? Just follow the rules, it's easier." Before Karen, things were more relaxed. Karen herself held court near the dessert table, her perfectly highlighted bob catching the afternoon sun as she gestured toward various homes, likely identifying infractions. Richard stood beside her, nursing a beer and offering occasional nods without making eye contact with anyone. There was no sign of their teenage daughter. I was serving myself some potato salad when Karen mentioned her previous neighborhood. "In Maple Hollow, we never would have allowed those inflatable decorations the Hendersons put up last Christmas," she said to another board member. "We had standards, but we moved for Richard's commute, of course." I filed that information away without really knowing why. Later that evening, as Ethan built a fort from sofa cushions and Zoe lost herself in a book, I scrolled through the latest neighborhood group post, another thinly veiled reference to my unwashed windows. The comment section was a mix of supportive emoji reactions from Karen's allies and conspicuous silence from everyone else. I had hoped Karen would eventually lose interest, find another target, or at least scale back her campaign. But watching the social dynamics at the block party had shown me something important. Karen's behavior wasn't just about me. It was about power and control, about positioning herself as the authority on neighborhood standards. And people like that don't simply lose interest. They escalate until they get what they want: compliance or departure. As I closed my laptop, I realized I'd been underestimating both Karen's persistence and the toll her behavior was taking on our life in Willow Creek. The sympathetic looks from neighbors, the whispered support, the careful distance, all of it created an atmosphere of constant tension. I'd moved here seeking peace, but peace seemed increasingly out of reach. And, for the first time, I wondered if staying silent was really the best way to protect my family after all. My phone buzzed with the familiar notification sound of the Willow Creek Facebook group. Normally, I'd ignore it until evening, but something made me check it during my lunch break at work. What I saw made my stomach drop. Karen had posted a photo of Ethan riding his bike in our driveway without his helmet. The caption read, "Concerned about unsafe behavior in our family-friendly community. Parents, please remember, helmet safety laws exist for a reason. Negligence puts our children at risk and reflects poorly on Willow Creek standards." The post already had 15 comments, most of them supportive of Karen's safety concerns. I nearly dropped my phone. She had photographed my 7-year-old son without permission and publicly accused me of being a negligent parent. I immediately switched to Messenger and composed a private message to Karen. "Karen, I need you to remove that post with my son's photo immediately. You did not have permission to photograph him or post his image online. This crosses a serious privacy boundary, especially involving a minor." I waited, watching the screen as the message showed delivered, but not read. 5 minutes passed. 10. I had to get back to work, but I couldn't focus. By the time my break ended, Karen still hadn't responded. Throughout the afternoon, I checked my phone between tasks. The post remained up, gathering more comments. Karen had hearted several that praised her vigilance. My message remained unread, though Karen had been active in the group since I'd sent it. When I got home, I settled the kids with a snack and immediately tried reporting the post to Facebook. I cited unauthorized photos of a minor and invasion of privacy. An hour later, I received an automated response that the post didn't violate community standards. Of course it didn't. Karen was the administrator of the group. She controlled what stayed up and what came down. I paced the kitchen, trying to decide what to do next. Ethan and Zoe were coloring at the table, blissfully unaware of the online drama. What infuriated me most was that Karen had only caught a split-second moment. Ethan had been putting on his helmet when he realized he'd left his water bottle inside. He'd jumped on his bike to ride the 10 feet back to the garage door, and in that brief window, Karen had snapped her photo. I was still fuming when Diane texted asking if she could drop by. I'd never been more grateful for her timing. "I saw the post," she said the moment I opened the door, speaking quietly so the kids wouldn't hear. "It's completely out of line." I ushered her to the back patio where we could talk privately. The evening air was cool, and I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. "I messaged her hours ago, asking her to take it down. She's ignored me completely." My voice shook slightly. "She photographed my child, Diane, without permission, and used him to publicly shame you." Diane's normally cheerful face was serious. "You know this isn't just about a helmet. It's never been about whatever rule she claims you're breaking." "What do you mean?" "Karen needs targets. When she moved here, it was the Hernandez family and their excessive holiday decorations. Then the retired couple on Oak Street with their bird feeders. Now, you." Diane leaned forward. "A lot of neighbors resent how she operates, but they're afraid to speak up." "Afraid? Of what?" "Becoming the next target, having their kids excluded from activities. getting their homes scrutinized for violations. Diane sighed. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but she's created this atmosphere where everyone walks on eggshells. I thought about the whispered support, the averted gazes, the careful distance neighbors maintained. I tried reporting her to Facebook, but she controls the group. I could contact the HOA, but she's on the board. I pressed my fingers against my temples. What am I supposed to do? Just let her get away with posting photos of my son? That's up to you, Diane said carefully. But if you decide to take this further, you should know you wouldn't be standing alone. People are tired of it. After Diane left, I went through the motions of dinner, homework, and bedtime stories, my mind racing with possibilities. As I tucked Ethan in, I studied his small face, relaxed in the glow of his dinosaur nightlight. "Mom, am I in trouble about my helmet?" he asked suddenly. I froze. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Billy's mom told him she saw a post about me not wearing my helmet. She said it wasn't safe. I sat on the edge of his bed, my heart twisting. "You're not in trouble, Ethan. You know we always wear helmets when we ride bikes. That one time you were just moving your bike a few feet, remember? To get your water bottle?" He nodded, his eyes serious. I told Billy's mom that, but she still looked mad. I kissed his forehead, promising everything was fine, but inside I was seething. Karen's post wasn't just invading my privacy, it was affecting how people viewed my son. After both kids were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The post was still up, now with 27 comments. As I stared at the screen, a memory surfaced from the block party. Karen talking about her previous neighborhood. Maple Hollow, how they had standards, that they'd only moved for Richard's commute. I opened a new browser and searched Maple Hollow neighborhood. It was a planned community about 20 miles away, slightly more upscale than Willow Creek, but with a similar aesthetic. They had their own Facebook group, and unlike ours, it was open rather than closed. Creating a new account under my maiden name, I requested to join. While waiting for approval, I searched public posts mentioning Maple Hollow and found a community forum dating back several years. A search for Karen Whitman returned dozens of results. Received another friendly reminder from KW about my garage door being open for 30 minutes. Was unloading groceries with my toddler. Does she have nothing better to do than monitor everyone's houses? Motion to review bylaws regarding surveillance. KW has installed additional cameras pointing at neighboring properties. Uncomfortable with my children being recorded without consent. Discussion needed regarding Facebook group moderation. Posts questioning certain HOA decisions are being deleted without explanation. KW claims they violate group rules but can't specify which ones. Post after post detailed complaints similar to what was happening in Willow Creek. The pattern was unmistakable. By midnight, I'd been approved for the Maple Hollow group. I scrolled through older posts until I found what I was looking for. Discussions from around the time Karen would have left. One post caught my eye. Results of HOA financial audit now available to residents. Contact office for details. The comments section was locked, but the timing matched Karen's arrival in Willow Creek 3 years ago. I drafted a careful message to the current Maple Hollow HOA president, introducing myself as a Willow Creek resident dealing with a situation involving former Maple Hollow resident Karen Whitman. I asked if they could share any relevant information about her departure. I also reached out to several members who had posted frequent complaints about Karen. 2 responded almost immediately despite the late hour. "She made our lives miserable for 2 years," wrote one, a mother of 3. "Constant surveillance, arbitrary rule enforcement. She reported my daughter's lemonade stand as an unlicensed business and had it shut down." The second response was more detailed. Karen left Maple Hollow after a financial review revealed she had used HOA funds to purchase patio furniture for her personal use. She claimed it was for a community space that was never developed. Rather than face formal proceedings, she and her husband sold their house within weeks. Many of us were relieved. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. This wasn't just about a mailbox or a helmet. This was a pattern of behavior that had followed Karen from one community to another. The HOA president responded early the next morning. While I cannot share confidential information, I can confirm that Mrs. Whitman's term on our board ended prematurely under contentious circumstances. Her departure from our community shortly after was welcomed by many residents. As I got the kids ready for school, my mind was working on a plan. Karen had been getting away with her behavior because she operated in isolation, targeting one neighbor at a time while positioning herself as the community's protector. But what if everyone could see the bigger picture? When I returned home after dropping the kids off, the photo of Ethan was still up. Karen had now added a comment. Safety rules apply to everyone, regardless of how inconvenient some may find them. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new document and began organizing everything I'd discovered about Karen's history in Maple Hollow: the complaints, the pattern of surveillance, the financial irregularities, and her hasty departure. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my family and potentially helping others who had been afraid to speak up. Karen had crossed a line by bringing my child into her campaign, and she had underestimated how far I would go to protect him. 2 weeks of methodical investigation would give me the evidence I needed. I would be thorough, I would be factual, and unlike Karen, I would be transparent. As I saved the document, I felt something I hadn't experienced since moving to Willow Creek: a sense of purpose and control. Karen had been playing this game for years. She thought she knew all the rules. She was about to learn she wasn't the only one who could keep receipts. I started my investigation that same night. With the kids tucked in bed, I set up a makeshift command center at my kitchen table, laptop open, notebook ready, a mug of coffee cooling beside me. The quiet of the house felt charged with purpose as I created a new folder labeled Karen Documentation. My first task, establishing a timeline of Karen's activities in both neighborhoods. I scrolled through months of Willow Creek posts, taking screenshots of every passive-aggressive comment, every rule citation, every friendly reminder that targeted various neighbors. The pattern emerged clearly as I worked backward through the archives. Karen would focus on one household for several weeks, then move to another once they either complied or withdrew from community engagement. By midnight, my eyes were burning from screen glare, but I had documented 17 distinct campaigns against Willow Creek residents over the 3 years Karen had lived here. I closed my laptop and rubbed my temples. This was just the beginning. The next day, after dropping the kids at school, I drove to the county records office. The clerk looked bored as I requested property records for Karen and Richard Whitman's previous residence. "Research project?" she asked, tapping at her keyboard. "Something like that," I replied, keeping my tone casual. The printouts confirmed what I already knew. They had lived in Maple Hollow for just under 3 years before abruptly selling and moving to Willow Creek. What interested me more was the timing. Their house had gone on the market just 2 weeks after the date of that cryptic post about the HOA financial audit. Over the next few days, I established contact with 5 former Maple Hollow residents who had openly criticized Karen in their community forums. Each conversation revealed similar stories: unauthorized surveillance, selective enforcement of rules, intimidation tactics, and abrupt silencing of dissent. "She had a camera aimed directly at our backyard," one woman told me over the phone. "When my husband asked her about it, she claimed it was for community security. But no other board member had authorized it." Another resident, an elderly man who had served on the Maple Hollow HOA board alongside Karen, provided the most damning evidence. "I've kept copies of all the meeting minutes," he said, his voice carrying a tremor of lingering indignation. "There was a special session after the financial audit. Karen had approved $3,000 of HOA funds for what she called community gathering space enhancements. But when we asked to see these enhancements, she hedged. Eventually, another board member drove past her house and saw brand new patio furniture. matched the receipt exactly. "What happened then?" I asked, pen poised over my notebook. We confronted her. She claimed it was a temporary storage solution until the community space was ready, but there was no community space in development. That was another of her fabrications. We voted to remove her from the board and requested repayment. He paused. Their house was on the market within days. "Would you be willing to share those meeting minutes?" Already scanned and ready to email. Several of us have been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. 1 week into my investigation, I received an email from the current Maple Hollow HOA president with an official statement. "While we cannot discuss specific allegations against former board members, we can confirm that Karen Whitman's term ended, following concerns about financial discrepancies and overreach of authority. The board subsequently implemented additional oversight measures for expenditures and communication protocols." I printed this email and added it to my growing file. Diane dropped by on the 10th day of my investigation, bringing chicken soup and concern. "You haven't been at the park with the kids lately," she said, setting the container on my counter. She eyed the papers spread across my table. "This is turning into quite the project." "I need to be thorough," I said, showing her a folder of organized evidence. "Karen's post about Ethan is still up. She's still taking photos of my house and yard. This isn't just about me anymore." Diane picked up a page of testimony from a Maple Hollow resident. "Have you thought about what happens after you share all this? Karen won't take it well." "I know." I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "That's why everything needs to be factual and documented. No accusations I can't back up. You should talk to Greg Peterson before you post anything. He's a lawyer, corporate practice, but he'd know about potential liability issues." I nodded, adding this to my mental to-do list. That weekend, while the kids were building a fort in the living room, I drafted my post. No emotional language, no personal attacks, just a straightforward presentation of Karen's history of behavior across 2 neighborhoods, supported by documentation. I titled it, "A Pattern of Behavior We Shouldn't Ignore," focusing particularly on the ethical concerns of photographing children without consent and misusing positions of authority. On Monday evening, I knocked on Greg Peterson's door, folder in hand. "Diane mentioned you might stop by," he said, inviting me into a home office lined with law books. "She said you're preparing some kind of community statement." For the next hour, Greg reviewed my draft and evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions or suggesting revisions. "Remove this sentence here. It's too speculative," he advised, marking the page. "And make sure you're only including documented facts, not hearsay or interpretation." "Is there any legal risk in posting this?" I asked. Greg considered this. "Defamation requires false statements presented as fact. If everything here is true and documented, that's your best defense. Still, I'd add a disclaimer that you're sharing this information out of community concern, not personal animosity." I made his suggested changes that night, polishing the final draft into a clear, factual presentation. The finished document included screenshots of Karen's public posts in both neighborhoods, testimonials from Maple Hollow residents, copies of relevant HOA records, and the official statement from the Maple Hollow board. Before I could second-guess myself, I texted Diane. "I'm posting tomorrow evening. Could use moral support." Her response came quickly. "I'll bring wine." Tuesday afternoon crawled by at work. I checked my phone constantly, half expecting to find that Karen had somehow discovered my plan and launched a preemptive attack. But the Willow Creek page showed only her usual posts, a reminder about trash can placement and a passive-aggressive comment about some people's holiday decorations going up too early. When I picked up the kids from after-school care, Ethan chattered about dinosaur fossils while Zoe told me about her social studies project. Their normalcy anchored me. This was why I was doing this, so they could grow up in a community based on respect, not fear. At home, I supervised homework, made dinner, and tried to act like it was a normal evening. At 7:30, with the kids engrossed in their bedtime stories, Diane arrived with the promised bottle of wine and a determined expression. "Ready?" she asked, settling at my kitchen table. "Not really," I admitted, opening my laptop. "But it needs to be done." We reviewed the post one last time. It began with a simple statement. As members of a community, we have a responsibility to ensure leadership positions are used appropriately and that all residents are treated with respect. Recent events have prompted me to share some concerning information about patterns of behavior that affect our neighborhood. What followed was a methodical presentation of evidence, first establishing Karen's history in Maple Hollow, then documenting her removal from their board following the misuse of funds, and finally connecting those past behaviors to current patterns in Willow Creek. I concluded, I'm sharing this documented information not out of personal animosity, but out of concern for our community standards of transparency, respect, and appropriate use of authority. I believe we all deserve a neighborhood where rules are applied fairly, where privacy is respected, and where leadership positions are not used to intimidate or control others. Diane read it over my shoulder. It's good, factual. Hard to argue with evidence like this. I took a deep breath, cursor hovering over the Post button. 3 weeks ago, I would never have imagined myself doing something like this. I'd always been the person who avoided conflict, who tried to keep peace even at personal cost. But Karen had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, photographing my child, publicly questioning my parenting, creating an atmosphere of surveillance and fear. "Here goes," I said, and clicked. The post appeared at the top of the Willow Creek community page. I set my phone down, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands. "And now we wait," Diane said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. We didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, the notification bell started chiming. 1 like, 2, 3 comments in rapid succession. "I'm afraid to look," I said. Diane picked up my phone. "Mary Winters, thank you for having the courage to share this." Bill Thompson, "This explains a lot." Susan Clark, "She took photos of my grandchildren at the playground last month. I asked her to delete them, and she refused." More notifications kept coming. I finally took the phone and scrolled through mounting responses. Neighbors were sharing their own experiences, reports against pets that barked once, criticism of holiday decorations, monitoring of children's activities, posts that had been deleted from the group for violating community standards, subtle threats about reporting code violations. No response yet from Karen herself. I wasn't surprised. She was likely crafting a carefully worded defense or planning her counterattack. "I think people have been waiting for someone to say something," Diane said, refilling our glasses. "You just gave them permission to share their own stories." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of vindication and anxiety. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether Karen would unleash fury, whether neighbors would continue supporting me, or whether this would change anything at all. But watching the community finally speak openly about what they'd experienced, I knew I'd made the right choice. The truth, documented and presented without manipulation, was the one thing Karen couldn't control. I closed my laptop and raised my glass to Diane. "To keeping receipts," I said. "And to having the courage to show them," she replied. We clinked glasses as my phone continued to light up with notifications. Whatever happened next, the silence around Karen's behavior had been broken. The rest was up to the community. The notifications on my phone didn't stop all night. I eventually muted it around midnight, but couldn't resist checking again at 5 a.m. before my alarm even went off. The comment count had climbed to 78. "I've been afraid to let my daughter use chalk on our own driveway after Karen reported the Michaels family last summer," wrote one neighbor I barely knew. "She demanded I provide veterinary records to prove my cat's vaccinations were current after she saw him sitting in my window," added another. "When my son had friends over for his birthday, she took photos of cars parked on the street and submitted them to the city as a safety hazard," a third neighbor revealed. I sat up in bed, scrolling through page after page. The stories varied in detail but shared the same underlying theme: systematic intimidation disguised as community concern. People I'd barely exchanged hellos with were suddenly opening up about years of small tyrannies they'd endured. By the time I got the kids ready for school, 3 separate neighbors had texted to offer driving them so I could deal with everything. I declined politely, needing the normalcy of our morning routine. "Why is your phone making so many noises?" Zoe asked as she poured cereal. "Some grown-up neighborhood stuff," I answered, not wanting to burden her with the details. "Nothing for you to worry about." At drop-off, I noticed parents watching me, some nodding in acknowledgement, others approaching with quiet words of support. "Thank you for speaking up," whispered Mrs. Collins, a kindergarten teacher whose holiday lights had apparently earned Karen's disapproval last December. "We've all wanted to say something for years," Mr. Delaney added, his hand on his daughter's shoulder. When I returned home, an email from Harold Jenkins awaited me, his name in my inbox unexpected and slightly concerning. "Ms. James, as HOA President, I'm calling an emergency board meeting this evening at 7 p.m. at the community center regarding recent disclosures. Your attendance would be appreciated as we discuss appropriate action. Sincerely, Harold Jenkins." The formal language gave me no hint of whether I was being summoned for censure or support. I called Diane immediately. "Have you seen Harold's email?" I asked when she answered. "Just got it." "Everyone on the board did," she replied. "This is unprecedented. Harold never calls emergency meetings. He once waited 3 weeks to address a sinkhole in the community garden. Should I be worried? I don't think so. The tide has definitely turned against Karen. Marcus Hampton, the retired judge on Sycamore Lane, just posted that her behavior constitutes harassment and potentially misuse of position. When a former judge weighs in like that, people listen. She was right. By noon, the comment count exceeded 150, with previously silent neighbors sharing encounters dating back to Karen's arrival. Some described having moved to avoid her attention. Others admitted to excessive rule compliance out of fear. One elderly couple revealed they'd stopped attending community events entirely after Karen criticized their grandchildren's behavior at a picnic. I forced myself to log off and focus on work for a few hours, but my concentration kept slipping. This was bigger than I'd anticipated. I'd expected some support, maybe even enough to get Karen to back down, but not this flood of shared grievances. At 6:45, I parked at the community center. A dozen cars already filled the lot, unusual for an HOA meeting that typically drew only board members and a few dedicated attendees. Inside, every folding chair was occupied, with people lining the walls. Harold stood at the front arranging papers with mechanical precision. His silver hair caught the fluorescent light as he glanced up, nodding at my arrival. Karen and Richard were nowhere to be seen. "Ms. James," Harold said, approaching me with extended hand. "Thank you for coming. I understand this may be uncomfortable, but your documentation has raised serious concerns that require immediate attention." His tone revealed nothing, but the slight downward tug at the corner of his mouth suggested discomfort with the situation. Before I could respond, Diane appeared at my elbow. "Let's sit together," she suggested, guiding me to 2 seats someone had saved near the front. At precisely 7 p.m., Harold called the meeting to order. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. "This emergency session addresses concerning allegations regarding board member Karen Whitman's conduct. The board has reviewed documentation provided by resident Melissa James, along with corroborating statements from numerous community members." He nodded toward a manila folder on the table before him. My file, I realized. He'd printed everything. "Mrs. Whitman was invited to attend but declined. She has submitted a written statement which I will read momentarily." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harold extracted a single sheet of paper. "As a dedicated volunteer who has only sought to uphold community standards, I am disappointed by this character assassination." My record speaks for itself, and I categorically deny any misuse of position. The timing of these accusations coincides suspiciously with my enforcement of legitimate rule violations. I request the board dismiss these spurious claims and investigate the coordinated harassment against me. Signed, Karen Whitman. Someone near the back actually laughed, quickly stifled. Harold continued without acknowledging the interruption. The board has independently verified the events at Maple Hollow through official records. We have also reviewed the pattern of selective enforcement and privacy concerns raised by residents. After careful consideration, we have 3 matters to address. He lifted a second paper. First, Karen Whitman is immediately removed from her position as communications director, pending a formal vote. A collective exhale filled the room. Harold pressed on. Second, we propose restructuring the community Facebook group with a committee of rotating moderators to prevent any single individual from controlling communications. Heads nodded throughout the audience. Third, we establish new photography guidelines prohibiting sharing images of residents, particularly children, without explicit consent. The formal vote that followed was almost anticlimactic. The removal motion passed unanimously, even among board members who had previously supported Karen. The other proposals passed with equal support. As the meeting adjourned, residents approached me one by one, some to thank me, others to share additional stories they hadn't felt comfortable posting online. "I never thought anything would change," said Mrs. Johnson, a widow who lived near the community entrance. "She reported my grandson's tricycle 3 times last summer." Mr. Hampton, the retired judge, pressed his card into my hand. "If she retaliates in any way, call me immediately." I drove home feeling strangely hollow. The validation was overwhelming, but I took no pleasure in someone else's downfall, regardless of their behavior. I had only wanted peace for my family and fairness for the community. The next week passed in eerie quiet. Karen's white SUV no longer crawled by my house on its surveillance rounds. No new critical posts appeared on the Facebook group, now moderated by a committee of 5 residents serving monthly rotations. No photographs of my children playing or my lawn needing attention. I saw Richard once, walking quickly to his car with eyes cast downward. When I waved reflexively, he startled, then gave a barely perceptible nod before driving away. Neighborhood children, including Ethan and Zoe, played more freely in front yards and on sidewalks. Spontaneous conversations between neighbors lingered longer without the tension of being monitored. Small changes, but significant. Exactly 2 weeks after the meeting, a real estate sign appeared in front of the Whitman house. "For sale!" in bold red letters, the suddenness of it surprising even those who had most opposed Karen. "Moving again," Diane said when she texted me a photo of the sign. "Think she found a new neighborhood to terrorize?" I hoped not, but said nothing. It wasn't my problem anymore. 3 days later, as I pulled into my driveway after work, I spotted Richard loading boxes into a moving van. Acting on impulse, I walked over. "Need any help?" I offered, keeping my distance. Richard looked up, clearly surprised. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "No, thank you. The movers are coming for the furniture tomorrow." An awkward silence stretched between us. I turned to go when he spoke again. "I want to apologize." I stopped, facing him again. "For Karen's behavior," he clarified, his voice low, "and for not stepping in sooner. It wasn't right, what she did to you and your kids, or to anyone else." I hadn't expected this. In all the neighborhood stories, Richard existed only as Karen's silent shadow. "Why did you let it happen?" The question escaped before I could reconsider. He stared at the moving box in his arms, a muscle working in his jaw. It was easier than fighting, than admitting we had to leave Maple Hollow because of her, not because of my commute, than facing that it was happening all over again. He set the box in the van with careful precision. "We're moving somewhere with more respectful neighbors. That's what she's telling everyone." The irony hung in the air between us. "Where are you really going?" I asked. "My sister's, temporarily. We're—" He hesitated. "Taking some time apart." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Richard gave me a look both grateful and resigned before returning to his boxes. I didn't see Karen before they left. According to neighborhood chatter, she departed early one morning, her car packed with personal belongings, leaving Richard to handle the move. The Whitman house sold quickly. 1 month later, a moving truck arrived, followed by an SUV from which emerged a couple with 2 children and, to everyone's surprise, 3 pit bulls on leashes. "The Gonzalez family," Diane reported after welcoming them with homemade cookies. "Mateo and Isabella with kids Elena and Lucas. The dogs are Rosie, Bruno, and Rex. All rescues, all sweethearts." I met them 2 days later when Ethan's ball bounced into their yard. Isabella invited us in for lemonade while Elena showed the kids how to properly approach the dogs. "Rosie's the gentlest," she explained as the gray pit bull placed her head on Lucas's lap. "She loves when you read to her." Isabella laughed at my surprised expression. "The rescue organization trained them as therapy dogs. They visit nursing homes and children's hospitals. People always expect pit bulls to be aggressive, but they're just reflecting how they're raised and treated." The sentiment echoed in my mind several weeks later at the neighborhood's fall block party, the first since Karen's departure. The usually subdued event had transformed. Music played from portable speakers. Children darted between yards without anxious parents monitoring their every move. The Gonzalez dogs, wearing bandanas that read, "Ask to pet me," greeted everyone with wagging tails. Standing by the dessert table, now laden with contributions not scrutinized for adherence to some unwritten standard, I watched Ethan and Zoe play tag with other children. No one photographed them. No one judged their laughter as too loud or their games as inappropriate. "Quite a difference from last year," Harold said, appearing beside me with a paper plate of potluck offerings. "It is," I agreed. The community needed a reset. We'd allowed problematic behavior to become normalized. He selected a brownie with deliberate care. "Your actions required considerable courage, Ms. James." Before I could respond, several other neighbors approached to echo the sentiment. "My daughter finally feels comfortable playing outside again," Mrs. Adams told me. "I planted those rose bushes Karen said violated the landscaping guidelines," Mr. Patel added with a grin. "They're thriving." I appreciated their words, but felt no triumph. This wasn't a victory over an enemy, but a restoration of what a neighborhood should be. A place where people could live without constant judgment and fear. As twilight fell, fairy lights strung between trees illuminated the gathering. Mateo Gonzalez, already popular for his infectious laugh and genuine warmth, organized an impromptu dance contest that had children and adults alike participating. Watching my son attempt what he called robot moves, while neighbors cheered him on, I realized how much tension had lifted from his small shoulders. Zoe, typically reserved in group settings, now taught younger children a hand-clapping game she'd learned at school. "You changed things for the better," Diane said, joining me on the grass where I'd settled to watch the festivities. "Not just for your kids, but for everyone." I shook my head. I just showed people what was happening. They chose to change it themselves. Still, it took someone willing to go first, to stand up. She was right, but I hadn't acted out of heroism. I'd simply reached the point where protecting my children from a bully became more important than avoiding conflict. As night deepened and neighbors gradually dispersed with promises to gather again soon, I collected my tired children. Ethan's hair stuck up at odd angles from running and playing, while Zoe clutched drawings she'd made with her new friends. "This was the best day," Ethan declared, yawning. "Can we come back tomorrow?" "The party's over, buddy," I explained, "but we'll see everyone again soon." "Promise?" he asked, suddenly serious. "Promise," I assured him. "This is our neighborhood now. For real." Walking home under stars and streetlights, my children's hands in mine, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, only peace, the kind that comes not from winning a battle, but from creating space where one no longer needs to be fought.